All right, everyone, welcome back to Talking Soccer. I'm, of course, Justin Horniker, and we're going to focus a little bit on the world of women's soccer today. We've been going hot and heavy with our World Cup coverage, and I think it's important, especially on a day where the NWSL free agency market is starting to heat up. Chicago Red Stars are once again in free fall, and there has been an announced planning at the year 2025 for a Canadian women's soccer league. Is something that Canadian fans have been longing for a long time. With the height of their women's program, defending gold medalists, the only team in the women's top 10 not to have their own domestic league, it was only a matter of time, right? And I think, from my perspective as a Kansas City NWSL fan, as a American soccer fan, I think it's so important that we continue to build out that North American soccer pyramid. The rise of Liga MX Femenil, the rise of the NWSL, quite frankly. ECNL teams are getting better, the USLW League coming into existence and expanding, and now a Canadian league that can kind of occupy that same space. Now, I'll kind of get into it. I think it's interesting because this league is going to start off with expansion fees between, I think the initial fees were a little bit lower. They're hoping for $8 million expansion fees, expanding to an 8-team league, 4 teams in the West Coast, 4 teams in the East Coast. So let's talk about this from an NWSL perspective first. This obviously puts the death knell in any sort of Toronto or Vancouver to NWSL dreams, especially with the Vancouver Whitecaps being engaged, being involved in this project. The Whitecaps have had their own interesting history, I should say. They have had their own coaching abuse scandals within their women's club, but it is important to note that the Vancouver Whitecaps have long had a women's academy team, and this is just another step to giving those academy players a professional home without having to go abroad. And that's the important thing, because we talk about this on the American side, especially with players that have to go to Europe in order to get playing opportunities, just because the NWSL is the best league in the world, top to bottom, and you have to be the top soccer players in the world to be able to make that league. And there are many rungs under that elite of the elite ladder. If you think about all the opportunities there are in the men's game, they're not anywhere close to that number of opportunities in the women's game, especially from a professional sporting outlook. Canada is going to be another option. Now, they're going to focus on domestic talent first because so many Canadians, over 500 Canadian professional soccer players, have to apply their trade elsewhere outside of Canada. And that's a huge thing for anyone trying to apply their trade, is to be able to do it closer to home. I speak to so many soccer players. Kaylin Williams-Mosier, she's a goalkeeper from Kansas City, played for the Kansas City Courage, coached for the Kansas City Courage in the ECNL, and is now over at FK Vlasnia, being a goalkeeper in the Champions League. And I talked to her a bit about how the only way for her to get that professional opportunity was to accept the opportunity that FK Vlasnia were offering her. There is nowhere for her to go locally to be a professional soccer player unless she wanted to go abroad. So, yes, it would still be going abroad, but having more opportunities just over the border is going to be so helpful, not just, with the Canadian League, but also with the rise of Liga MX Femenil as well. There are now many more options, at least by 2025, there will be many more options in North America, closer to home, in the same time zone also, which is very important. I think that's something that we think about with going abroad. Yes, like, if you're in KC, going to Mexico City or going to Vancouver versus going to Vlasnia, Albania is probably not as big of a difference once you're abroad. Like if you're in Mexico City versus in Albania, like yes, you probably, okay, that's not really comparable. But you're still in either the same time zone in terms of Mexico City or in a similar time zone in terms of being in the Pacific in Vancouver versus being in Europe, in a completely different day a lot of the times, and such a different culture. If you're in Kansas City, you are very familiar with Mexican culture And of course, Canada culture is America Light, as we all know. That's a joke. Don't come at me. Don't come at me, Canadians. So let's talk a little bit about this league and what we know about it so far. The big name involved in it is Christine Sinclair, Portland Thorns player, Portland Thorns captain, Team Canada captain at times, and Canada's most prolific goal scorer of the modern era. So, as for the piece in the Equalizer, I was just going to read some of it out. Top level women's professional soccer is coming to Canada. First two teams are going to be the Vancouver Whitecaps and the Calgary Foothills Soccer Club. Calgary Foothills have a long-standing history of soccer in Calgary, of men's and women's youth league, and now they're committing to the pro game with the Canadian Super League, or whatever it's going to end up being called. I wanted to say Canadian Premier League, but that's already taken on the men's side. So, side note, that'll be interesting too to see kind of how this kind of competes, because I think that, it seems like this group wants to compete at a level with the NWSL, and the Canadian Premier League launched and wanted to kind of compete at a level with the MLS, which of course is way under the level of NWSL in terms of talking elite place in their table. NWSL is, like I said, the toughest top to bottom league in the world. MLS is, it's rising, but it's not even in the top 10 of leagues if you look at the kind of league coefficient. So in order for this Canadian league, it's aiming to be something of that level. And I don't think an 8-team league in Canada is going to be anywhere close to NWSL. Come at me in the comments. But I think it will not only give a chance to players, but it'll still be a highly competitive league that if NWSL teams wanted to loan their players, Canadian players especially, to this Canadian league, that they would get a high proportion of high quality games that they don't get if they loan them to the USLW League or the EPNL, or even, send people like Jessica McDonald to the Aussie League. Like, I think that's the quality that you're looking for, where you can get something similar to the Aussie League or higher, I guess. With the team that's closer to home, you keep your Canadians close, and honestly, everyone deserves to play for their hometown club. So, league will have a pair of conferences with 4 teams each. 6 remaining teams will be confirmed sometime next year in 2023, with the goal of launching in 2025, and it's going to have the same season as NWSL. So, same season MLS, same season as American and Canadian soccer leagues. It's going to start in spring, it's going to end in the fall. I don't know if you know this about Canada, but it's kind of cold, so you can't really play winter soccer. Our club has always been a big supporter of the women's game, starting at the grassroots level through our girls' elite program, said Whitecaps FC CEO and sporting director Axel Schuster. Missing piece has been a top-level professional women's team, and we are excited to be a founding member of a domestic women's professional league in Canada. That's the important thing, is you finally get to have that piece in your pyramid that's been missing for so long. And we go through it in America too, like the Scott Gallagher folks, they have a men's team, they have a women's team. Their men's team gets to play in MLS Next Pro. They share a lot of resources with STLFC. Obviously, it's not one for one, but STLFC have a lot of academy personnel that were with STLFC and Scott Gallagher, but they, don't necessarily have a pro pathway for women who want to stay in St. Louis and play. Here in Kansas City, you can go to the KC Courage, who, again, aren't a pro pathway, but at least give you an opportunity to play. Same with Scott Gallagher. And then you have the Kansas City Current right here at home. So to give you that professional pathway is so important. And it's something that's missing in all but 10 American cities. Depending on what happens with the USLW League, I don't need to go in depth on that in a Canadian League video. But if I come across anything in this video, it's just that we need to do a better job at filling out that pyramid. Soccer in America isn't perfect. It's not perfect on the men's side either. But on the men's side, you have a much clearer pathway, whether it's through the youth clubs into your academy or through NCAA into USL, into USL League 1, USL League 2. etc. There are just more teams across the country than there are on the women's side, and frankly, that's because of a lack of monetary support. It's, as the NWSL has proven, if you invest in women's sports, you will get an equal return as you would on the men's side. And it's even a lower barrier of entry. I don't need to tell this to you watching this video, but I just get sick of people saying that you can't invest in women's sports because that you can't make money in it. And that's not true. You don't make money in a lot of sports, not just women's sports. And if anything, the NWSL, with the level that it's at, and it'll be the same way with the Canadian League, you can, if I'm a investor, I would rather invest in this Canadian Women's League than I would, say, the Canadian Premier League. And that's just given the pedigree of the Canadian Women's National Team, given the pedigree of Christine Sinclair being involved, given the pedigree of, wanting to keep these Canadian pros who are top 10 in the world, if not top 1 at times. That is a much, much better proposition to me as someone who's an informed investor versus investing in a Canadian Premier League team that can't even get TV clearance. Anyway, I went on a little bit of a rant here, so I do apologize. So, of course, Christine Sinclair is the big name, but there's also Diana Matheson, who is also a 2-time Olympic gold medalist for Team Canada, and they also have other partners like Thomas Gilbert, who have partnered with Canadian sports leaders in the past under their umbrella of Project 8 Sports Incorporated. It's a really cool development, something that's been rumored for the past while, but it's definitely picked up steam in the past couple of weeks, especially after Steph Labbe, probably Steph Labbe, right? It was named the Whitecaps FC General Manager of Women's Soccer. This was announced kind of towards the end of the NWSL season last year, and it was kind of an interesting development because there hadn't really been any steam as much as there has been Toronto to the NWSLs for Vancouver to the NWSL. So Vancouver Whitecaps obviously trying to get into women's professional soccer, and this is the thing that makes the most sense, knowing that they are hiring Steph Labbe as the women's GM for the professional league coming in. So we know 2 teams. Let me know. I'd love to know what you think the other 6 teams will be. Obviously 2 more on the West and 4 in the East. I would assume Toronto and surrounding areas will get 3 of those teams. I said, all right, we don't need to joke about that. But I think that's an interesting development too. Is this more on the realm of, does it have to be somebody with an affiliation with Toronto FC, with York United, with existing, with the Impact, or I think it's interesting to see who steps up and who kind of puts together these bids, if it's somebody already connected with the men's team, or if it's something like the Calgary Foothills, a group that has a lot of youth soccer infrastructure that wants to jump into the women's professional infrastructure as well. Let me know what cities you want to see in the Canadian Women's Professional League, whatever it is to be named. And 3 thumbs up if finding this video. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed to me yet. And folks, we will talk very, very soon.